Welcome to Talk Learning with Me, a podcast where we dive into engaging conversations about learning and development. Together, we explore a variety of topics, industries, and skills to help you grow in your career. Whether you're a seasoned professional, transitioning into a new role, or looking to advance in your current work, this podcast is for you. Let's talk and learn together. I'm your host, Joseph Diaz, and in today's episode, I'm joined by Tanner Kohler, a UX specialist with Nielsen Norman Group, where he and his team conduct research on good design and share their findings with UX designers all over the world. Tanner and I discuss usability, research, and psychology, breaking down how these concepts can help us create easy and seamless learning experiences and professional tools. Tanner shares practical insights to help us apply user experience design in our own work, whether it's building more intuitive designs or improving how we deliver learning solutions. Without further ado, let's jump straight to our conversation. All right, what's up, Tanner? Welcome to the show.
It's good to be here. I'm glad. It's good to see you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm super excited to be having this conversation with you. A little bit of background for people that are listening in. So I got to know Tanner through our master's program at Brigham Young University. We studied instructional psychology and technology. And Tanner, to be honest, I think you got me through a lot of my classes. The projects that we did together were probably some of my best ones. And if we went back and looked at my grades, I think anything I collaborated with you on had to be probably some of my best scores in the entire program.
Well, I think that's definitely mutual. You got me through it too. We had some ups and downs. I remember one particular. Remember when we were working with P3 Utah? That was kind of interesting.
Oh yeah, we had some good times, and glad to hear that I carried my weight as well.
Oh man.
But before we jump into things, Tanner, I don't want to get ahead of myself. Would you mind giving us a little bit of an introduction about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Tanner, and I currently am working for a little company, a consulting group called Nielsen Norman Group. And I've been with them for almost 3 years. I worked with them while I was doing the master's with you, which was a lot of fun. I did that same master's in instructional psychology and technology at BYU. And then I kind of rolled over and have been working with this group that is a UX consultancy. So user experience design is kind of our industry. And so it's a lot of fun because what we do is we do like a lot of research on what makes websites and mobile apps easy to use. And then we publish a lot of that research for designers. But we also turn a lot of it into training courses for those same designers and researchers to kind of teach them some of the basics and best practices for their field. And so I get to do that as well. I get to teach, I get to do some research. And it's a lot of fun. So I've been learning a lot while I teach.
That's awesome. I always love seeing when you have a new article come out or a new video, just seeing some of the research you're doing, some of the experiments you're running, the testing that you're doing. It's always super insightful. And I'm curious, what does a day in the life look like for you as a UX researcher? What does the day-to-day look like for you?
Well, a lot of time on my own. It's kind of an independent. Sometimes I liken it a little bit to being a member of a department, a faculty member at university, even though in some ways it's so different. But
Yeah.
it's kind of have your own research projects going, your own articles you're working on, your own teaching schedule. And so most of my time is just spent independently analyzing data. You'll find me in tools like Dovetail, which is a qualitative data analysis tool, pretty much any day, coding data, analyzing data. You'll see me writing a ton. I live in Google Docs all day,
Nice.
writing something or other, some article we're going to publish. Teaching a couple times a month. You'll see me all day teaching for our conferences and have people joining on Zoom from all over the world. So I kind of jump between those at different times. So.
That's awesome. It sounds like you get a lot of variety from sometimes you're in kind of lockdown mode, doing research, coding, writing,
Definitely.
going through data, and then all of a sudden you're delivering, training, teaching with big groups. So that's kind of cool, that variety of work that you get to do.
It is. It is. It's kind of unique. And I didn't really understand what it was when I applied for this job, to be honest. But I've come to realize like, oh, wow, this really is a lot of fun for me. So I'll stick around. Yeah.
So cool. I'm super excited. Well, as we start to talk and dive into this topic of user experience design or UX, I want to start by kind of introducing the topic at a novice speaking level, kind of getting some keywords and phrases related to UX design that maybe somebody new to the field might encounter. And so I know we talked a little bit about some common words or some common phrases that might come to mind. What would be maybe some of the first ones that you think of are key vocabulary or phrases in this space of user experience design?
Probably the term, if you had to pick one word that for me encapsulates what UX is all about, is the term usability. Which is a common word that you might hear on the street. It's not an overly jargony term, but pertaining to any kind of product or experience, whether it's digital or physical, of how easy is something for a person to use. But that has a lot of facets to it. Like, how easy is it for someone to figure it out the first time that they encounter it? How easy is it for them to remember how something works, when they come back to it later? How easy is it for someone to understand the things that they read or that they encounter in that, product? And that's really what UX kind of is founded on, is this idea that if you do research with real people and you watch people use things, you can evaluate how usable something is.
Right.
And then you can make some changes to improve its usability for people. So, I mean, that's like a fundamental term that you definitely need to be familiar with in UX.
Very cool. So as I listened to that, one of the words that stood out to me was you said that something is easy to use. And
Hmm.
I feel like maybe usability, you said it is in everyday things of how easy is this thing to use. I feel like usability, maybe I'm wrong on this, but I think maybe we don't notice it until something isn't usable.
Hmm.
I was reading a book by Don Norman that you had recommended to me
Hmm.
about the design of everyday things. And he talks about how one clear example is doors, where the usability of a door, is it a push door, is it a pull door,
Yeah.
can really be frustrating to users when it's not clear. And in our old offices, we had these doors that they looked the same on both sides, and I could never remember if it
Uh-oh.
was a push door or if it was a pull door. And I found myself walking into that thing all the time, going the wrong direction, pushing when I was supposed to be pulling.
Yeah.
So it sounds like that's a really good way to think about usability, is like how easy to use is something. Is that a fair way to kind of describe that?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that door example, that's a classic. I mean, people call them Norman doors because Don Norman really just derided those, but that's absolutely true that, people sometimes will go as far as to say that good design is invisible, because
Yeah.
when something is designed in such a way that you just immediately recognize what it is and what it looks like and what it can do and it can't do, and you just, people use the word intuitive, which is kind of a buzzword that, that gets overused, but I mean, I think it's
Right.
appropriate in this case that it's fairly intuitive to someone of what they're supposed to do when they encounter a thing. Or, if you think in the context of a website, you're looking for information about your visa on the government website, like you look at the menu options and like which of those just makes the most sense to click on for visa
Right.
info, and it's just intuitive, but the key is that, oftentimes designers don't get as much credit as they deserve, because they do a whole lot of work to try and understand, like, how do people think and what's natural for them, and then they design around that, and then people just smoothly glide through it, and it's usable and easy to use, but it's really by design that it's that way. So absolutely.
Yeah, sounds like a harsh reality that if you're doing your work right, you're doing it well, and you're making things usable, people might not ever know that you did your job, because they're not even going to notice that something's usable because you just made it such a seamless experience, so
Yeah.
easy to use that you don't even have to think about it.
Yep. Yep. It's the designer's curse. So you have to be humble to be a good designer, I guess.
Yeah, I love that. That's really cool.
Yeah.
And it kind of ties into one of the other words that you mentioned earlier and that we wanted to talk about was this idea of research. Because I feel like maybe that research is where you do get to see usability. At least maybe people doing research might recognize that someone is doing quality work in the usability space.
Yeah.
But when you talk about research, what does that word research really mean for you in the work that you do?
Mm.
Because you talked about some things like coding data
Yeah.
and gathering insights. So, what does research mean for you in this space of user experience design?
Oh boy. What a topic. I mean, I have a colleague who here at NNG, Nielsen Norman Group, who she goes around saying all the time that UX isn't UX without research, right? It's impossible. It's impossible to design something for a person unless you understand that person. And so there's really two kinds of research really show their heads in UX. And this is true in any kind of product design, right? Or instructional design, really any kind of design. But the one type is a kind of a discovery type of research where you're going to go into a project, you're going to build something new. And so before you actually put the thing together or build a prototype of some kind, you do some exploration and you try and understand really what are people's issues and problems and questions. And you use that discovery type of research to feed your work, your design. But then there's like this whole second category of evaluative research that once you've made the thing, now you want to know, is it working or not? And how do we improve it? And so then you're starting to test that thing. And some of your research questions might be, how usable is it, right? Where are people struggling to use this thing? And you'd continue to obviously iterate and change that design. And like I said, that's true in really any kind of design. That's not novel to UX, but we very much subscribe to that way of thinking, of doing the discovery up front and then really evaluating the product as you try and make it better. So
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's a really helpful way to think about it because research might feel like it is so broad. There's so much research that you can do. So I love kind of having those two clear camps that you described. So as we're thinking about, hey, I'm doing some research for the usability of any kind of product, whether it be a learning product or whether it just be any kind of a tool,
hmm,
smartphone app, or product, whatever it might be, you're thinking about, well, am I doing this discovery research? Am I trying to just learn and observe and figure out what people are doing?
hmm,
Or am I actually just trying to see how this works? Am I trying to do an evaluation and
yeah,
draw some conclusions about how things are working?
yeah.
So in your work, as a UX researcher, do you find yourself getting to do both types of those researches or do you do more one than the other?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have to acknowledge that the typical responsibilities of a UX researcher, someone who's going to be going by that term, is probably a little different than the things that I do day to day. A lot of what we do is to try and assist and support true UX researchers, that might work for a company or a product team. And so thinking about someone in that role, in a traditional UX role, they're going to be doing hopefully some of both. Um, but my guess is that if you pull the average UX researcher off the street, they're going to be spending probably more of their time in the second camp than the first, in the sense that generally businesses are hesitant to fund as much discovery research as most researchers would like
Yeah.
to do, whether that be interviews or surveys or diary studies to really try and understand the pain points and the problems. A really mature company and a good team is going to be doing that regularly. But really, what UX researchers are most known for, and their favorite method, is usability testing, which is an
Mm-hmm.
evaluative method, where you put that product in front of someone, you give them a realistic type of a task to perform in that product, and then you see how well they can do. And
Yeah.
then you see where it breaks down. And that's where you're going to see probably most time being spent. And that's, I think, maybe not quite as true of me because of the role that I have. We do probably a more of an equal balance between those different kinds of research, but that's maybe one difference between us and a typical UX researcher. But they're doing all that usability testing. I mean, that's their favorite method of all.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful context. And to think about, like, even in my own role, I can see why maybe that evaluative research is going to be more meaningful for stakeholders because it's
Yeah,
going to give something actionable and really clear that we can do to
yeah,
maybe make a change or to make an improvement. Whereas that discovery, you might just discover that things are usable and it's good to go. And that might not seem as valuable, even though that is really insightful to know, hey, we did this discovery research and we found things are good. They're A-OK, it's not broken, don't make any changes, but that you might kind of lend a little bit more towards that evaluative research, even though both sides should be treated as equally valuable.
yeah. Like just to give a concrete example, because you're absolutely right. like let's say we're working on an app, for like a bank or something, and we are trying to differentiate ourselves a little bit more from the competition. So we ask ourselves, okay, what opportunities are there out there that we're not exploiting? What are some of people's pain points around banking that we can really try and meet? And that's discovery research, right? To go out there and interview some people and watch some people use their bank and talk to them about their experience. And there's like no concrete end to that. Like there's a lot of things you can learn and things people will tell you, and like you can grow that list almost indefinitely of things that people experience around banking. And so
Right.
it's like, well, where do we draw the line? How much budget do we devote to this and time do we devote to this? And so it's a little scary. It's a little intimidating for people. But then you think, okay, down the road, maybe we build a prototype of our app or a new feature in our app, and now we're going to test or evaluate how well this is working.
Hmm.
All it takes is a few sessions with people, and you got a concrete list of things that you want to change. And now it becomes this checklist of like, okay, let's fix that, let's change that, let's remove that. And that feels so actionable. And so I think that's one of the reasons why stakeholders really love that second kind of research, is because it feels so concrete and it feels like
Right.
you can do something tomorrow with that, which
Yeah, that
just,
makes a lot of sense. And I love the way that you point out it can become this rabbit hole. It can become never ending how much feedback and how much research you could do to really find out how are people using our resources? How are people using the tools that we're giving them? And what do they think about them? And so you do have to kind of just make that executive decision and say, this is where we stop. We've got enough, and let's do something with it, and kind of maybe shift from that discovery into that evaluative research and say, now that we've discovered these points, that's enough. We could obviously discover a lot more. There's really infinite possibilities we could discover.
yeah,
Let's shift our focus, do some evaluative research, and come out with some action items, some key things that we're actually going to do to make a
yeah,
difference, to make a change, and increase that usability, make something easier to use, make it more seamless, make it more effortless.
yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah,
Very,
absolutely.
very cool. I love that. And so there was one other term that I wanted to get to, that goes off of your background in particular, which was psychology. Because Tanner, you've got a bachelor's degree in psychology, a master's degree in instructional psychology and technology. And so I'd love to understand the role of psychology for you in user experience design as you're observing how people use things, the ease of use, how, like, what psychology means to you. What is that word, psychology?
Oh boy, what a topic as well. Such a fun one. And you're right that like that's. I remember when I was an undergrad, I took all these different courses, business courses, and all, trying to find my niche. And then I took some psych classes, and I was like, this feels good. Like this.
I
This is the
found my
most.
people.
Yeah, this is the most interesting thing in the world, is to look at the people around you and to observe them and learn from them and how they
Yeah.
think and how they behave. And so, when you look at the field of UX, we've done research on this to try and figure out where are people coming from, what industries are they drawing from, because most people in the field of UX did not go to school for UX.
Yeah.
Like that proportion of people is growing. There are more UX programs in universities than there ever have been. But lots of people, especially those who've been in the field for a long time, they transitioned from somewhere else. And so, common backgrounds that you'll see are people who come from development, right? Coding or engineering, building the tools. You see a lot of people coming from visual design, so graphic designers, illustrators. You see people coming from more like a writing background, like English or editing or copywriting. There's a few different. Then there's this kind of small group of us who came in from psychology, and
Yeah.
those are my people. And the common story that you hear is that people like us, we went to school for psychology, and they told us, here's what you do with psychology. You either go to be a professor and you publish in journals about weird phenomena of like human functioning, or you go and you do therapy, and you become a counselor, and you help people who are in crisis or need assistance. And those are really the two paths. And I looked down both those roads, and I loved the people. I loved the topics of psychology, but neither of those career paths really felt like the way for me to go. And
Yeah.
so then I started digging a little bit, and I realized, there is this third neglected child of the family, and it's design. it's design. It's people who take their understanding of people, their knowledge that you gain from psychology about how to study people, how to work with people, how to learn from people. And you're not applying it necessarily to a therapeutic context or a research context. You're applying it to a design context where now you're trying to build something to benefit people. And so, you and me, we both studied instructional design. And, if you're going to do research about instructional design, you're researching what? People, like how
Yeah.
they thought and how they felt and what they learned and what they're capable of. And, UX design is the same. You're designing a little bit different kind of product, but you're still wondering, how do people think? How do people feel? How do they interact with this? And so I've been so grateful for a background in psychology because I think it arms you with vocabulary, with research skills, with the kinds of questions and things that help you to understand the people
Yeah.
in kind of a nuanced and really fun way. So that's for me how psychology kind of feeds to UX is you're really hyper focused on those users. They're your subject matter.
That's really cool. And you're totally speaking my language that one of the kind of assets that you brought from that psychology background is the vocabulary,
Hmm.
having the language to speak about how people think, how people feel, and how people interact with the world. It gives you a language that maybe other people can't quite describe it in the way that you can because you have that more in-depth understanding of the psychology of people, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and you're able to really draw from that background and say, how can we make things more usable and more seamless in the world?
Yeah, like I'll just give you a concrete example. Like I was talking the other day with someone who came from an English background. Okay, so they're a great writer, and they get really wrapped up in the content that like a web page has and the words there, and uh, you know we're working on this design together, and they're just writing their heart out. They're writing poetry on the page, and just with this assumption that like people will read it. If you write it, they'll read it because it's in front of them. And I'm here like, you know what? We know a few things about real people and how real people do things because we
Yeah.
observe real people. And fields converge, behavioral economics and social psychology, and a lot of these kind of come together, and I wrap those into the psychology field, really. But we know that people don't just read things because it's in front of their eyes. People skim and skip and scan, and if it's irrelevant to them, they get bored and they leave. And so it's like, hey, we've got to bring this really raw, realistic view of how people actually function to design, because when we lose sight of that, we are designing for our ideal of what people are, but not the reality of how people are.
Mm-hmm.
And
Man,
yeah.
Tanner, that was the perfect segue because I was going to actually ask if we could kind of dive a little bit deeper into these vocabulary words in context, and you hit the nail right on the head with that. So it sounds like coming in with a different background in user experience design, you view the world and you view your users in a different way. That this writer was looking at words on a page of how beautiful and how eloquent they were and how meaningful they were, but with your psychology background, you looked at it and then you were thinking of usability.
Yeah.
How easy is it to really read if I'm not invested in the prose, if I'm not invested in how well written this content is? And the usability in the sense of maybe a blog post,
Hmm.
usability is how easily can I find the information on the page? Can I skim
Mhm.
it and can I
Yep.
find it quick? I kind of think of there's a lot of jokes about recipe websites and blogs that the usability is awful because there's a 10-page story first about how the author came up with the recipe, and
Yep.
what people just really want to see is what ingredients do I need and how much of those ingredients do I need. And
Yeah.
so from a user experience standpoint, you're looking at that usability and saying that what people are here for, what would be seamless would be the page loads, and right there is your shopping list of groceries, and right next to it is how much you need so that you can just start cooking and get right to it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I think just another example comes to mind, and don't be offended, Joseph, but this is a little critique of the instructional design world compared to the UX world. Here's a
I'm all
little.
for those critiques. I'm all for it.
I live in both worlds and I love them both. But like this is one of the things that pushed me a little bit away from instructional design toward UX was, I remember I was working at the time for the MTC, the Missionary Training Center, which, I don't know if people know a large church religious nonprofit training a lot of young volunteers. And so a lot of what we were doing there was building training and lesson outlines for teachers to train these volunteers, missionaries. And we would sit up on the sixth floor of this big, beautiful building, and we'd have our documents. We'd be writing learning objectives, and we'd be putting, at the time, a lot of this content into Canvas, into a learning management system that these volunteers are supposed to be using to learn all this stuff. And then we'd publish the stuff, and we'd kind of dust our hands off, and it was like, whoo, job done, right? Look, think about all the people that will learn all these lovely things. Then I would descend the elevator from the sixth floor, and I'd go over to the classrooms where these volunteers were. And I would see them just take one look at that Canvas course and roll their eyes and just say, "Oh my goodness, I hate this, right? This is so boring. It's so
Yeah.
boring." And I was like, I love instructional design. I love learning objectives. I love thinking about, what we're trying to help someone gain. But it's a little bit of an ivory tower. And it felt that way up on that sixth floor with big glass windows, but it's like you're living in a different reality and you're not completely aware of or embracing the truth about the end user, in this case, a
Hmm.
learner. And then I discovered UX, and UX says we are going to go in the cracks and we're going to watch real people do real things and get them to tell us the truth about what they think. And we're going to use that to go back and iterate and inform our design. And we're not going to live in an ivory tower. And I thought, now these people have it figured out, right? These are the people that are actually making something that is human centered, that is actually focused
Hmm.
on the end person, And so, anyway, you can do instructional design that way too. But at the
Absolutely.
time, I just realized there's something missing here, and it's embracing reality of how people do things, and that's what I love about UX.
That's really cool. And I love that perspective because I would be lying if I said I have never made a learning experience that I didn't give that same reaction to my learners, that my end users rolled their eyes and said, "Oh, great."
We've all
And
done.
then yeah, we've all done it. And the thing that they're looking for, the usability they want is how quickly can I find that next button to
Yep.
get through this as quickly as possible so that I can get back to my everyday life. So I
Yep.
think it's a true reality that we have to be aware of is when we're considering the usability of the resources we make, whether those be learning resources, learning
Mm.
materials, or if it's even just a tool that people are going to be using, is are we making this something that they want to get out of their life as quickly as possible, or is it something that is getting used? And I think, like
Yeah.
you described, that research, that getting down on the ground, seeing what people are actually doing, taking the time to check
Mm.
usability and be willing to embrace and say, this maybe isn't what I thought it was going to be. This isn't
Mhm.
working. And what am I going to do with that information? I think that's really, really insightful.
It comes right back to that humility of a good designer. That a good designer is committed to an outcome. They're committed to a result. They're not committed to a method. And so, if the method that they are trying to use to achieve that outcome is not working, they have to be humble enough to change and say, I'll change my design. I'll change my method because I'm so riveted on that outcome. And the users are the only ones that can get us there by telling us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And I can only imagine, even since coming down from your sixth floor ivory tower, you probably still face some challenges in the work that you do every day. And so to kind of take this to an advanced level, linguistically speaking, and talk about maybe some of the challenges that you face, are there any challenges that come to mind that maybe you faced recently in your work, whether it be a challenge or a struggle with research, with usability, or maybe a struggle with psychology that you've had to kind of overcome or navigate in the last little bit?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think really two things come to mind that are challenges. One is resources and one is access. So I'll talk about what I mean by each of those. Resources in the sense that, like, okay, it's great to talk about how much we want to get down on the ground and do this research and spend time with people and evaluate things and get feedback, but like that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to do that. A lot of that's qualitative, where you're having one-on-one sessions with people, and that's like 60 to 90 minutes, and that's a lot of data to process. And then it takes money too. Like you're often paying people to sit down with you and do this. And And so, at some point, it takes weeks to really run a session, sessions and do a small study like this. And especially if you're dealing with a lot of different products that you're putting out and you're trying to evaluate all of those, it's extremely resource intensive. And so there's a practical line you have to draw, and every organization faces this of, when are we going to say, well, it's good enough for now, and we'll revisit it in the future. And so that's a major obstacle to really realizing some of these ideals that we're talking about. So that's kind of the resource side. And but the other one is access. It sounds so good and nice to like just pull some people together, some users, or throw a survey out there and gather this data. But then you have to wonder, are we really tapping into and measuring the true constructs that we're interested in? And this is another kind of topic from psychology: is, are we really measuring a legitimate construct, or are we getting data that's measuring something else? Are people being honest in that survey response? Are we biasing people in the session that we're running? Are people even willing to participate and respond when we ask and invite them to? And so it's a little bit more difficult than you'd think to kind of just reach your hands out there and access the insights that you want from these people, because they are people and they're guarded and there's all kinds of conflicts. And so those are two huge obstacles that any researcher is going to face, any designer is going to face, and I definitely feel and experience those myself. So
Yeah, no, that was super insightful. And I can only see, even in my own work, not working as a UX researcher, I still run into those same constraints of resources and access. Because even if someone wants to just do a little bit of research in their own field of work, whether they be a teacher, maybe they're working in a completely unrelated industry, it is hard to get those resources. Like you said, it can be expensive to do this type of research. You're taking people away from their jobs, or you're taking them away from other
yeah,
things that you're doing. Or like you said, maybe you're paying them to participate. Or that access, are we actually getting to the right people? Maybe the people who are most accessible, that low hanging fruit,
Hmm.
is going to give you some data points, but those might not be quite the right data points. It's not going to give you the true information that you need to
Yeah.
go make meaningful, lasting change. But sometimes, hey, we take it because it's a low hanging fruit, so we're going to run with it. So I think that resources and access are some really important challenges to keep in mind as we're looking at how do we make things more usable? How do we perform that research and then look into the psychology of what people think, what do they feel, how do they experience the resources and content that we're giving them.
Yeah, absolutely. Frustrating, but that's realities.
Right. I love that. Frustrating, but hey, what can you do? It's the nature of the world.
It is.
Well, Tanner, this has been super, super insightful getting to break down some of this key vocabulary of user experience design, hear a little bit about the work that you're doing and a day in the life, and just your involvement with these key terms, getting a little bit more understanding of what usability is, what different types of research there are, and some kind of broad ways to think about it. And then to hear your unique take of psychology and how we can use that has just been really, really insightful. So as we wrap, I wanted to ask you, if somebody wanted to dive deeper into UX design, are there any resources that you would recommend, whether that be books that people could dive into or just any other resources that come to mind that someone could go check out?
Yeah, I can mention two. I mean, you'll have to forgive me for being slightly self-promoting here, but that's my job. Two
I love it.
resources. If you're interested in really the nitty-gritty, practical recommendations and guidelines and definitions of a million and one terms relating to UX, we'd love to have you visit our website, nn, as in ngroup.com, which is filled with over 2,000 free articles about UX. So if you want to go
Amazing.
there, it's a wealth, a treasure trove of information for free. And if you want to take a course, we'd love to have you in a course. But the other is, if you really are kind of interested in the psychology of design, uh, you've mentioned the book already, The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman. It's actually a revision. He originally wrote it under the title, The Psychology of Everyday Things, because he takes this really great, practical, easy to understand look at how people think about products and how people use those things and why those can be confusing or not. So, anyway, The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman. It's a great read.
Awesome. I love the plug for the Nielsen Norman Group resources, the stuff that's available online, taking a course and the book. And I'll make sure to put the links to all of those resources in the show notes. And then lastly, for people who want to connect with you, learn from you, Tanner, where can people find you? It sounds like you've got some content on the Nielsen Norman Group website. Where
Yeah.
are all the places that people can find you and connect with you?
Yeah, probably best places is you're welcome if you want to follow my work. It all goes up on nngroup.com. You can just search my name, Tanner Kohler, and you'll find all my stuff there. We could probably put a link to that maybe. And then LinkedIn. I'm always happy to grow a network and connect and chat over LinkedIn with people. So happy to do
Fantastic.
it.
Awesome. Well, Tanner, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been such a pleasure getting to learn with you and break down some of the language of user experience design. And thank you again so much for the time. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, Joseph. It's always good to talk to you.
That wraps up our conversation with Tanner Kohler. I hope you found our discussion on user experience design as insightful and inspiring as I did. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe to Talk Learning with me on your favorite podcast platform. If you enjoyed today's show, feel free to leave a rating and review. It helps others to discover the podcast and also provides valuable feedback to me to keep improving. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn, where I share more insights on learning, productivity, and personal development. Have a topic you want me to talk more about? Shoot me an email at talklearningpodcast@gmail.com or message me on LinkedIn. I'm always excited to meet new people and explore different topics. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll talk soon.